Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the 536th board meeting of the California Regional Water Quality Control Board, Central Valley Region. I would like to introduce the board members and staff at this time. On my far left is Carmen Ramirez of Atwater. Between Carmen and myself is John Constantino of Grass Valley. My far right is Bob Schneider of Davis, and on my immediate right is Denise Cadera of Allensworth. My name is Carl Longley of Fresno, and sitting in the audience is our former vice chair, now deputy secretary, Department of Food and Agriculture, none other than Jenny Lester Moffett, and we'll be hearing from Jenny in a moment. This board meeting is being webcast to the public. I'll now introduce the executive officer, Pamela Creedon, who will introduce her staff.
Good morning, Dr. Longley, members of the board. Across the room to my left is Brett Braidman, a staff manager here in the Sacramento office, and next to Brett is Andrew Altavote, assistant executive officer in the Sacramento office, and next to Andrew is Andrew Derringer, staff counsel for the board. To my far left is Karen Lanfranchi-Rizzardi, executive assistant for the board. And next to Karen is Adam Lapitz, Assistant Executive Officer in the Sacramento office, and to my immediate left is Patrick Palupa, Senior Staff Counsel for the board. In the audience we have Linda Bracamani, Assistant Executive Officer in Sacramento, Clay Rogers, Assistant Executive Officer in Fresno, and Clint Schneider, Assistant Executive Officer in Redding, and we have a number of staff in the audience.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Carmen, could you please lead us in the pledge?
Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. In order to conduct our regional board meetings in a fair and efficient manner, we will be proceeding in accordance with the meeting procedures that have been provided with the summary agenda, and they are also available here at the staff table and available upon request. They're also posted on the board's website, and they are summarized on the computer screens during breaks. In other words, they're quite available. Any questions or comments regarding these procedures may be directed to Karen Lanfranchi-Rizzardi, our administrative assistant. Takes us on to agenda item number 17, board member communications. And I think at this point I'll take the lead for the first one. Yes, I would very much appreciate having Jenny come up and giving her a chance to go to the podium. And you'll be limited to 8 hours, no more, please.
Well, I have to say I'm not prepared to give my board member communications and list all of my meetings, although I'll submit them in writing. I'm not sure if they're pertinent anymore. But I just wanted to say hi and sorry that I missed the meeting yesterday. I have, as I've sent an email to Kieran, who I think passed it around to you guys, I have been appointed Deputy Secretary for California Department of Food and Ag. It's a position that I'm really excited about working in. It is a full-time position. Part of my job will be working with the water boards, and as a result, I'm not able to serve on the water board anymore, at least as a board member. However, I will not be very far away. I think actually I'll probably be at the next meeting in a different position, in a different role. So I will be very engaged. I hope you each, staff and board reach out to me should you ever need me. Now that the meetings are being televised, or I'll be able to watch them. So just be aware. I'm watching. I could be I'm watching. So
You're
I wanted to thank you guys for the time on the board. Both the board members, staff, everyone has been an unbelievably wonderful group to work with. I can't, say enough about the positive experience that I've had on the board, and I think that I'm very proud of the things that we have worked on in the few years that I was on the board. We've made a lot of headway on the irrigated lands program and on a ton of other programs. Marijuana is making great progress, and fracking, and all. I won't even go on because I will forget something. But just wanted to say that I'm really proud of the work that we have done together as a board, and I'm excited to see the work that you guys continue to do. And this has been definitely a very wonderful group to work with, and a very proud group. And I have loved serving on the board, and yeah, I will not be far. And I welcome you guys all to come and visit. And I'm certainly happy to come here should you ever want me to be here in person, not watching on TV. And so please, yes, please, I'll be gone, but don't forget me, and I will be in and out. And yes, so I just wanted to thank you guys.
You'll be on speed dial.
I will be on speed dial.
Yes, you will be.
Well, it was when I learned about you getting your position, it was both a happy and a sad moment. And we talked before about the possibility of you getting it. And, you know, I had my fingers crossed for you getting it and my fingers crossed for you not getting it. I was all tied up, you know. But it was likewise an extremely enjoyable and profitable experience working with you, Jenny. And thank you for your service. You'll obviously be coming back at a future board meeting to get your placard. We say nice things about you and some snide remarks on that, as you well know. But
Ken's gone. I don't know if we'll have the snide remarks. He was the great comic. I'm sorry.
Pamela's such a nice person.
I have to figure out if Adam has that gift for, you know.
Well, actually, Ken was the one that used to put the little comments on.
Yeah, he did. He did a great job.
Yeah.
But I'm looking forward to working with you, Jenny, and you know, with Sandy moving on, we kind of lost that connection. So I'm really happy that, especially with your knowledge in the board and how we operate it, it's wonderful to have that level of knowledge over at CDFA, because we can't work without CDFA, especially with our ag programs going forward. So I'm really looking forward to working with you.
Yeah, likewise.
Yes, John?
So we'll save all the compliments, pretty obvious, but we'll save them for when we get the plaque. I just wanted to let you know we only had a one binder meeting this time, so you picked the wrong meeting to
We'll
miss.
say ha, ha, ha.
You know, yes, I guess that is true.
So, any further comments? Yes.
Just that I majored in snide remarks in college, so if there's a gap,
There we
I can
go.
help.
We have a new recruitment. There we go.
Go ahead, Bob.
I just wanted to comment that in a lot of the time I've been on the board, a lot of the effort has been to break down silos between different state agencies and get people to work together. And your being at this position and coming from the Central Valley Water Board in particular, I think, and your expertise with both water now and agriculture, I think will be invaluable. And congratulations.
Thank you.
Denise?
Jenny, I attended my first meeting in December. Was it something I said? You're not going to be here. But it was a pleasure getting to work with you. There were 3 women and 3 men. Now there's 1 less. But enjoyed having the opportunity to meet with you, and I'm sure you'll do fine in your new position, and we'll look forward to seeing you here when you come back.
You know that Jenny could go a long ways to helping us find another woman who's an Aggie.
I have been doing what I can. I have a couple seats to be filling to replace me, so one at the farm too, if you know anyone who's. But yeah, certainly I will be keeping my eyes and ears peeled and trying to encourage folks who would be qualified to serve on the board. So.
And I talked to Danny, and he said he'd be looking, but you need to keep bugging him to have him help you look.
If you could find somebody I could carpool with, that would be helpful.
Bob's a little more specific. It is.
I don't know about that one, but we'll give it a try. Well, thank you
Okay.
so much, and I'll be in touch, I'm sure.
Thank you very much, Jenny, for your service. Any further board member discussions?
Yes.
Go ahead, Denise.
Yesterday, I said I would give a report. I work with the Tulare Basin Wildlife Partners. It's an organization, a nonprofit organization in the Central Valley that facilitates the engagement of partners and funders, stakeholders, and multi-benefit projects to promote ecological and economic health, sustain our agriculture, heritage, and enhance the quality of life in the Tulare Basin for now and in the future. I've been working recently with a working group. It's the Tulare Basin Wildlife Partners Watershed Connections Working Group. And so we're working to advance the collaborative watershed planning and resource management in the Tulare Basin based on sound science and mutually identified needs for the regional economy and ecological sustainability. Here recently we've established some subgroups, and those subgroups are intended to help actually get things moving and work in small groups to focus on particular activities. So we've started by identifying issues and potential projects, and some of those subgroups include sustainable groundwater and surface water, wetlands, wildlife habitat protection and restoration, and then disadvantaged and tribal community support for addressing water-related challenges. And of course, I'm serving on that group. We are moving forward, and I'm sharing this with this body because being on the board, I'm connected in ongoing activities related to water quality. So April 18th, there will be a 10-year recognition celebration for the Tulare Basin Wildlife Partners. It will be at Atwell Island Project, which is in the southwest portion of Tulare County, the now drained Tulare Lake. The area is in Alpine. It's a restored wildlife, native grassland and wetland home to the federally listed and sensitive animal species. They will be having a number of events that day, recognizing all the people that have participated in these efforts, and also, games, food, information booths, discussing a number of issues, climate change, and the whole gamut in dealing with a watershed. So I would just invite you, the staff and board that would be interested in coming out to that celebration on that day, and that's all that I have on that.
That's April 17th?
18th.
18th. Yes, Bob.
Carl, I mentioned briefly yesterday that I've been participating in this Firescape Mendocino stakeholder planning process of the Mendocino National Forest, and I just wanted to get the date, was January 28th, and Griffin went from the Reading office and attended that board, and I really appreciated it. They're looking a lot at forest health issues, and those involve a lot of multimedia, water quality issues, forest health issues, air quality issues. And the big issue with air quality is the forests are going to burn, and we're going to either do them in a more controlled, prescribed manner, or they're just going to be conflagrations. And how do we deal with that with air quality, and how we deal with sedimentation, water quality issues. So thank you, Clint, for being sure we had somebody representing us.
Thank you, Bob. Or John?
So yesterday I deferred the two board member communications. I did attend the Human Right to Water sort of roundtable at the Cali, PA that Felicia Marquez, the chair of the State Water Board, was putting on with Martha Guzman from the governor's office. So I did drop by on that, and then I participated in the Wetlands Restoration Subcommittee with Adam. It was a phone call earlier in January. He has the date, but thank you.
Any further communications from board members? Thank you very much. We move on then to item 18 on the agenda, public forum. I have a card from Suzanne Womack. Microphone on, please.
Ooh, speak. Okay. Hi, I'm Suzanne Womack. I'm a teacher. I had to go to a meeting for one of my students this morning, so I was a little late. But I came before the board in October. My property, my family's property, it's a farm from the 1880s. Half of it was taken for the Clifton Court Forebay, and we have severe water quality problems, and we want to be exempt from the water quality, I guess, fee that the state is charging, because our water quality is affected directly by both the federal and the state pumping. In October, Joe Karkowski was assigned to talk with us and work with us, and Wes we met. And Joe, up through December, was working with us. I guess he's been reassigned. But anyway, the last I heard, we were going to be, he was going to get a group together. I should probably bring this back. In the 1970s, well, in the 60s when this was put in, the state put in drainage systems that dump into the forebay. Those systems are compromised now, almost 50 years later. Our waters are filthy, depending on the amount of water being pumped. 15,000 cubic feet per second is it's over 9 billion gallons a day being pumped. We take 6 cubic feet per second when we are pumping. And so we're dealing with dirty water. We're also dealing with, in December through January, and I believe it's still there, the water hyacinth completely clogged up. The problem was in Stockton was sucked down to us. We're the last place because those of you that know, the forebay has the pumping for the state, and then right down here, right past the fish screen, is the federal pumping. So we're being affected by both sides of pumping. We're asking to be exempt. Probably, maybe you're only people exempt from water quality testing, because basically everything that we do here is pumped through the Clifton Court. I asked for the state, what do they do? And they do monthly water quality monitoring. They've monitored our Wes or Joe, I'm not sure who found out. They have monitored our intake, which is actually on state property. Once the water leaves our area, it goes to a state area, and then it's a state thing. So anyway, I'm asking that my ranch be exempted from this because our water quality is so compromised. Like I said, Joe was going to do that. We're going to do some sort of study. Nothing happened. I've started getting phone calls when this meeting came up that we want to deal something. But I need this. I need something to happen now.
Right.
We were forced to pay almost $3,000 for water quality.
Your situation was addressed in an addendum to the executive officer's report. Pamela, could you or one of your staff give a reply, please?
Well, we can certainly. Unfortunately, Joe moved on to a position at the state board.
Yeah.
It's not that staff's ignored it. I guess we're preparing a report to provide you. But unless the board specifically opens the order to exempt you, at this point you do meet the requirements to be covered under the Irrigated Lands Program, and for that we just have the two options to offer you: a coverage with the coalition, or or go through an individual order, neither which will make you happy. But right now there aren't any exemption provisions in the permit that we could provide you, because you do technically fit under the definition of a discharger that has to be regulated.
But my discharge is regulated with the forebay. It's monthly tested. It's probably tested more than anybody else's.
We don't have a provision in the order currently, ma'am. I mean, if the board would like us to try and structure something, but
We're
at
unique.
Well, you may be, but we don't have the provisions in the current order that would allow us to tell you can't be covered. You would need to be covered under the current order. We don't have an exemption provision in the permit.
I understand that, but I'm asking for something different, because we are different.
Well, you have asked the board, so if the board
Yeah.
wants us
Right.
to
Well,
reopen the
Joe-
order, we can certainly do that. But right now, the
Right.
only option I have to provide, and that's what you'll get in a written report from our staff, is that you are required to be covered under the order.
It's true what Pamela says, but what our executive officer says, but we don't have the advantage of having Joe here to be able to.
Well, we have staff. If you'd like staff
I
to
know.
speak to their findings, we certainly
I guess the
can.
question is, I don't have a good feeling. It appears to me to be a very unique situation, but I don't have that good of a feeling for it. And I need more of a scientific basis, if you will. I understand a lot of the measurements that take place are simply have to do with flows and the amount of water,
there-
depth of water, or
Well,
whatever.
there are many things involved in the irrigated lands program involving establishing this. There's monitoring requirements, but it's not specifically for each independent land. They're part of the coalition. They're part of a greater monitoring effort. That's what they're paying for. But unless she enrolls in the individual order, she's not held responsible for individual monitoring on her property.
Well, I'd like to learn personally, as one board member, I'd like to learn from staff what they consider to be the uniqueness, or maybe not uniqueness, of this particular issue, and their suggestions. Because if this is truly unique as it is being contended it is, we may in fact.
Well, she's
find
in the
it,
Delta. She
find it
has
necessary
land
to reopen the order.
seepage. She does have seepage. She is impacted by that, but
Yeah.
a lot of our islands within the Delta are similarly situated.
Well, that's what I want to find out.
She's still,
Yeah.
they're still operating a farm and they're still discharging.
Yeah.
I think they still need to be a member of a coalition.
But-
And
but-
that's a pretty innocuous way to be able to deal, or, that's the minimum impact on farming. And I think we don't want to start doing a whole bunch of exemptions here and there. So
Well,
I would like to see the staff's letter when it goes out, and then we can talk about it later. But I don't think this is the place to really
that's right.
explore this
So
particular
I'd
issue.
like to see staff come back with a little bit more detailed information.
Do you want a presentation or you just want copies through the EO report? Because we can agendize an item if you'd like.
Let's see how significant that report is when it comes up before we make that decision.
Yeah, and I feel similarly to the chair, because I see what you're saying about all the ways that they're similar to other properties, but I'm also interested in how they're different and whether that the degrees of difference merit maybe a consideration of a different thing, of maybe of an exemption. And then legally, I'd like to know whether other programs that we've done like this have ever had an individual property exception.
John?
And Pamela, I certainly get the response that there's no exemption now. And if there's no exemption, you're either, you have two choices, and I get that. And I understand Bob's point that we don't want to have willy-nilly exemptions all over the place, but I don't know that I've seen, I think I'm with Carl, that I haven't seen a recommendation as to particularly why this should or shouldn't,
Well, Joe, the staff has been working on
Okay.
it. Yes, Joe was involved. Joe's gone, but staff's still working on it. So they're preparing a report. I think Patrick wants to say something, so I'll let him say something. But we're developing that report right now. But if you want a short answer, the short answer is right now the
Sure.
order
No,
doesn't
and
provide
that's
an
my first, that's
exemption.
my initial point is the short answer is there's no technical or legal way to get her property out at this point. But I guess I was encouraged at least the thought of, ma'am, I'm not sure exactly what you're asking for, just the fee or the whole program. And I just want to make sure it's clear to staff
And
what the request is so we can respond.
Okay, could I, because it's clear from your responses, you don't know what I'm asking for. First of all, Joe said his group would work with me, and that was right before Christmas, and they were going to talk to me, and we would work together so I would know. I haven't been contacted. So there hasn't been this back and forth. Secondly, my property drains directly into Clifton Court. That's our main drain. Almost all of our water drains into Clifton Court, and it has to.
Excuse me.
We couldn't farm.
Excuse me, I didn't interrupt, but we've heard this, and I think we have a process. We're going to wait until
Right.
we have the report from the executive officer.
But
and
I
then-
need to be in touch
No,
because.
right now, excuse me.
No, I mean
excuse
with the
me,
group.
Excuse me, we're going to have, our staff is very good about communicating people. We're going to have a report from staff based on the work that's been done today. And if the chair decides that he wants to take some other action, or if it comes up at the board in the EO's report next time, anyone on the board can decide that they want to move something more forward. So we have a process, and we'll just have to wait till staff comes
Right.
back with their report.
We need that report. And Patrick?
Now, I would note, for the benefit of everybody here, to familiarize ourselves with what we're talking about. The issue of exemptions in the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program was discussed at length for a number of years throughout the development of those orders. A lot of folks, maybe not exactly in this position, but in very similar positions, came forward to the board, and essentially we had a lot of stakeholder meetings, a lot of board meetings themselves to discuss exemptions to the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program. And frankly, this board and statewide developed the policy of if you are discharging waste to waters of the state, which would occur even if it is a discharge to Clifton Court Forebay, the most economical way of regulating those discharges was to get them all regulated under the coalition. So the fees that would be paid to the coalition would essentially cover the monitoring report, even if it is monitoring that could be tiered off of the monitoring that's already being conducted into Clifton Court Forebay. All that information is available to the coalitions that they will report back to us as part of their coalition monitoring reports. So the burden of an individual reporting order, which is really what would have to happen if she wanted out of the coalition, could be even an order of magnitude more than the fees that she's paying now.
The individual permit.
Yeah, and so it's, we've essentially, I do want to relay that the board has tried its very best within the confines of the law to provide the most cost-effective way of dealing with these types of discharges. And there's many, many people in your situation that discharge to regulated water bodies that are sampled fairly regularly. And the board's made the decision that even though those bodies are monitored, the best way of doing it isn't to have you compile a report to the board, but to have a coalition take all the monitoring that's being conducted as well as its own monitoring and prepare a package for the board to analyze.
And I think what's needed is, Joe left, we need to continue that dialogue. Staff needs to continue the dialogue with Ms. Womack, and we will consider it later. And you're right regarding the fact that we had discussed the exception issue and went away from it, but there may well be another way to, if maybe nothing more than better education of what this program's all about and how it's implemented to make Ms. Womack feel.
So Dr. Longley, I wasn't
a
aware
little
that
more.
Joe had contacted her and she's not received anything since. We'll check into that. I'll have Adam look into
Right.
it personally, and we'll
Great.
make sure we contact Ms. Womack.
And so when can I expect to hear within the next 2 months?
Staff will be contacting you.
I'm sure-
I will have staff contact you in the next few weeks.
Okay, and when's the
Okay.
next board meeting?
The next board meeting's in April,
Okay, I'll come back.
in Fresno.
Fresno?
Fresno.
Oh, I have a sister there. One of our members, too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to address the board on any matter not before the board in the day's agenda? We'll then go to the executive officer's report. Is there any further discussion on the executive officer's report? Pamela, is there anything you'd like to add on the executive officer's report?
No awards today unless you have any other questions. Nothing.
You don't have any awards today, do you? Okay. Then we will move on to the uncontested calendar, item 20 on the agenda. This is the time and place for a public hearing to consider adoption of uncontested items 27 through 31, except for the following: enforcement, other business, basin planning, MPDS permits, waste discharge requirements, WDR, MPDS rescissions, and change of name and/or ownership. Does anyone wish to discuss any of these items? Seeing none, are there any late revisions?
No late revisions.
Good. We'll close the hearing. I'll ask for a motion and a second.
I'll move to the uncontested calendar.
John's moved.
I'll second.
Carmen seconded. Roll call.
Ms. Cadara,
Yes.
Mr. Schneider, Mr. Costantino, Ms. Ramirez, Dr. Longley,
Yes.
motion carries.
Thank you. Used to the old days, it was so easy. You could just simply ask for a voice vote. No reminiscing. No reminiscing, that's right. Don't go back in time. Move on to agenda item 21, which is be an update on the Pacific Forest Land Stewardship Council. I have the pleasure of welcoming yet another board member to talk to us today. Former board member, Soapy Mulholland. Soapy, welcome aboard. This time we'll receive an update on the work of the Pacific Forest Land Stewardship Council from the board's representative to the council, which is, of course, is Soapy. This is an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. Following Soapy's presentation, interested parties will then be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. We'll now hear Soapy's presentation.
To Carl first, I'm the alternate to the Pacific Stewardship Council, and Soapy's and this board made a very wise decision to have her be our main person working on the Pacific Stewardship Council, and she's done a really tremendous job for the, I don't know, what must be last 5 years. And Aline is the executive director, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say. And I was at the last board meeting, and this is really moving into the end game, and lots of good work's going on.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you very much, Bob. It's a pleasure to be here. It's been over a year, and there are new faces up there. And Denise, it turns out I'm part of the Wildlife Coalition as well, and I look forward to working with you on different levels. It's great to be back and to be with staff that I recognize and cherish, and with Dr. Lumley. It's been over a year since we've been here, so we're trying to just let you know a little bit about what goes on at the Stewardship Council, and Bob probably fills you in too, but this is just to give you a quick report. And I'm really lucky to have with me today Aline Zanger, who's going to do the background. She's our executive director, and we would not be accomplishing what we're accomplishing if it weren't for her. So she's going to start and give you a little background on the Stewardship Council, and then I'll come back and talk a little bit about what we've accomplished since I was here last.
Thank you, Soapy. We have a PowerPoint presentation. Will it come up automatically here or on the screen?
Do you remember what the name of the file was? Just make sure you stay close to the mic.
Great, good. Thank you. As a way of reminder, the Stewardship Council has a dual mission, and that is to protect PG&E's watershed lands and uses, and also to invest in programs that connect underserved youth to the outdoors. When we last presented over a year ago, both Soapy and I talked about the youth program. This time, in order to be a little bit briefer given your agenda, we're not going to address the youth program, but if you have any questions at the end, we'll be glad to address them. The Stewardship Council was born out of a settlement agreement when PG&E declared bankruptcy in the early 2000s. And our principal job is to develop a plan to protect PG&E's watershed properties. We received $70 million for that purpose, and we're spending that over a period of probably about 15 years. What makes the Stewardship Council particularly interesting is that we have 18-member board with very diverse representations, including industry groups like the California Farm Bureau and the California Forestry Association, and then environmental groups, state and federal agencies, PG&E, and the Public Utilities Commission. And that board has to make all decisions by consensus, unanimous votes on everything. Otherwise, it doesn't move forward. And that's why our decisions, aren't made overnight. It takes a lot of time to listen to the perspectives of the various organizations, just as you have represented on your board, and to try to come to a consensus that moves forward, that protects the watershed lands, but also protects the interests of the public and the other entities that are represented on our board. our board members, many of them have been with us since the very beginning, 2004, and we're really pleased that Soapy has been the primary representative of your board since 2007. And Bob originally served as the primary member, and we were really pleased when he came back as the secondary a couple years ago. And we're pleased he often attends our board meetings and always has a lot to offer because of his perspective, not only as a member of your board, but the work that he does in his day job. So thank you very much, Bob. We appreciate your work. Soapy chairs the Watershed Planning Committee, and that's 14 of our 18 board members who meet once every 6 weeks. And that's where the consensus is really established. Those meetings last for several hours. And they also have those packets that, not 2 binders, but 1 big binder. And they come prepared, and Soapy works with the board members, and we try to develop consensus there. So by the time decisions come to the full board, there's usually, we're pretty sure that unless there's some new comment that's made by a member of the public, and if that happens, sometimes a matter is sent back to the Watershed Planning Committee because our board does listen to the public comment, just as you do. But that's where the work is done. And she also serves on a number of ad hoc work groups. We have a forestry work group and a conservation easement work group. So it's a tremendous commitment, and we're pleased that you've selected someone who is willing to devote that amount of energy to our efforts. There's 140,000 acres of land, 1,000 parcels, over 22 counties, and most of it's in your region, from Shasta County down to Kern County. There's some acres in the Eel River watershed. Here's just a picture of a couple of the properties. They're gorgeous, many of them quite pristine. And the public, even though they're private lands in the sense that they're owned by a utility, the public is out there enjoying them as if they were public lands. There's 6 beneficial public values that we are to protect, and they're also quite diverse, ranging from wildlife habitat to agricultural uses and forestry. About 70,000 acres have been made available for donation to nonprofit organizations, public agencies, and tribal entities. And PG&E is retaining about half the properties for their hydro operations. So now I'd like to turn it over to Soapy, who will give you an update of where we are in our process to recommend fee title donees, easement holders, and to get these transactions completed.
So to date, the council has selected 16 new landowners, including state and federal agencies, counties, conservationists, nonprofits, and some tribal groups. We anticipate that over 30,000 acres will be donated to these entities. As a way to sort of demonstrate why it's so important, one of the recipients is a combination of UC Extension Forestry and CAL FIRE. And if you think about what we're doing with these forests is we're making them available for study, for recreation, for testing, fire safety, bringing this all into an area where we can look at climate change and figure out a way to make our forests healthier at the same time keeping up with the public values that we cherish. So we really feel like we're doing something great. 12 organizations with experience holding conservation easements have been selected to hold conservation easements over 100,000 acres. This includes both donated lands and easements over retained lands by PG&E. Most of our easement holders are not-for-profits, land trusts mainly, and there are 2 exceptions to that so far, Ducks Unlimited and the Watershed Resource Conservation District. I think that I'm very grateful for my appointment because I think that what I was able to bring to the table was a land trust perspective, which was missing with the other board members. So the board's initial fee and conservation easement holder selection recommendations are expected to be completed this year. And when we were back talking to you a year and a half ago, it was on a slow uphill. It took a long time to get going, but when you think that all of these will be completed this year, it's pretty amazing. Negotiations are right now happening on 50 separate transactions. PG&E's got their, as they say, their pedal to the metal, trying to keep up with everything that we're doing. The board has adopted 19 conservation and conveyance plans for 14 out of 47 of the planning units. These plans explain how each of these transactions will apply will comply with the requirements of the PG&E bankruptcy settlement. The board's adoption of an LCCP for specific parcels is the last action that the board takes to complete its responsibilities. And the board is expected to adopt more than 50 LCCPs in the next 2 years. Before a land transaction can be completed, PG&E has regulatory obligations as well. Conservation easements and land donations must first go before the California Public Utilities Commission, and when the lands are within a FERC boundary, which is a Federal Energy Regulation Committee, they have to take the project to them as well. And to date, the CPUC has approved 4 transactions and FERC has approved 3. So far, lands have been donated to the County of Tuolumne, the U.S. Forest Service, and the Sierra Foothill Research and Extension Center operated by the University of California, which is the one I referred to a minute ago. In December, the first conservation easement on lands being retained by PG&E was recorded, and that easement was actually recorded by my organization, Sequoia Riverlands Trust. It was a great process because we decided we maybe needed a model easement, and it was quite a beginning. It took several years of working with PG&E and us being sort of the guinea pig. But we got it done, and now we have a model easement that we're using for these lands, but it's also going to be a model used by utilities across the United States, so it's pretty exciting.
So, Sophie, where's Doyle Springs?
Doyle Springs is in Tulare County. It's up above the town of Springville.
I know where it is. I was curious if that was the same one. Thank you.
Yep. Let's see here. Fun. Let's see. I lost where we're going here. Another important aspect of the council's work is to fund enhancement programs in the PG&E watershed lands. And the key goals that we've established for this program include promoting partnerships among various organizations, achieving tangible, lasting physical enhancements, and increasing the value and public use of the PG&E watershed lands. In plain English, we're going to put $25 to $30 million on the land, and these are going to be projects that are around for a long time, that serve the public. Some of them are trails, some of them are studies, some of them are lasting, built cabins, and we're doing all kinds of stuff. So that's a really exciting piece of what we hope to leave behind for the citizens of California. So as you can see, our plate's full. We work hard, and you know what that's like because I sat in your seats and I know what it's like to get those binders. But we're finally really moving ahead, and I'm here with Aline to answer any questions or to elaborate on anything that we brushed over.
Thank you for a very interesting, informative report. When do you think that the Stewardship Council's role is going to wrap up?
It's really an interesting question because we have these retreats where we try to figure out where it's going to be. And of course, it was supposed to end in 2012. And we're now looking at a change. The board decided that because of all the enhancement projects moving forward and this money, that rather than disband, that the board in some fashion would stay around to make sure that all of these transactions are working after they're finalized and that the enhancement program has moved forward. So we will keep a staff, but a much reduced staff with different obligations, and the board won't totally, do we have a date for total disbandment of the board?
No, but I expect it'll be within about 5 years.
Interesting. You've done great work. Bob?
A detail, on the slide with the participants, well, it started as the California Department of Fish and Game. It's now the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, so
We should have had that.
update that slide. I just want to say a couple things. One is, this might have been a very difficult thing for PG&E. This whole process came out of their bankruptcy. And instead, PG&E has really embraced this process and supported it. And in particular, Mike Schnur and Randy, I forget Randy's last name. Livingston, yeah. As the reps to this from PG&E has done an absolutely stellar job. And I think PG&E really deserves a lot of credit for the success of this. And you mentioned the 100,000 acres, and there's 140, I think, total. And a lot of those are really special because they're riparian habitats. Of course, since this was a lot of hydroelectric properties, they're really, while they're not as huge acreage, they're absolutely critical in terms of what they represent in the environment. So how these are treated in the long term is really important, and I really appreciate the job that the Stewardship Council has been doing on that. And the other is this unanimous consent process. And you look at all these stakeholders, and Sophie mentioned this, but I just wanted to underscore that process of all of these people understanding this mission deeply, feeling it, really feeling it, and really working hard to make hard decisions sometimes to move this forward. So it's just been a pleasure for me to be at some of these meetings. And the other thing is, when I was here the first time on the board and I was the member to this, a lot of my interest was on the youth group. And a lot of resources, almost instantaneously, the Pacific Stewardship Council became the primary leader and funder for underserved youth programs in the outdoors. And they've continued that role by spinning off another organization and working very hard to become a permanent resource for grant giving to organizations working in this field. So thank you.
Can you remind me where is there a geographic boundary for the youth programs? Or is it throughout the whole state or Northern California?
PG&E's service district, which is quite large.
Yes, could you expound on your youth program? I'm very interested because a lot of the work that the Tulare Basin Wildlife Partners, they're interested in trying to engage the youth so the future leaders are involved in this process. And we've been working very diligently in trying to promote that leadership development in our communities. And so I would be interested in learning a little bit more about the youth program.
Yes, the Foundation for Youth Investment is the organization that is now administering our funding for the youth program. And they're concentrating on, as the Stewardship Council did, on connecting middle school and high school youth to the outdoors, because that's where they found that there was the least amount of funding and support. And also, one of our goals and the Foundation for Youth Investment's goals is to really build the next generation of stewards of the properties. And we, both of us, have focused on underrepresented youth. And they are the face of California now and even more so in the future. So it's very important that they have an appreciation and understanding of the importance of the waters and all of the other natural resources of the state. So Foundation for Youth Investment gives out grants every year. They have an application process, and be more than happy if to give you my card, and I can make sure that they can connect with any organization you're interested in. In the past, we have funded organizations working in the Tulare area that were having a youth work on riparian watershed restoration efforts. A lot of it is trying to get youth out actually being stewards of properties, not necessarily just going out and enjoying them. So it's a combination of both. So
I appreciate you sharing that information. I mean, the activity we're doing on April 18th is to engage the youth with scavenger hunts and so forth. So we're trying to build up to the point to where they are participating and know the value and becoming stewards. So thanks.
We're working with you on that with the Sincere Partnership as well as my organization. But one of the things I wanted to say about the youth program, by spinning it off, there's going to be the opportunity for funds to be raised for areas that are outside of the PG&E service area. So you know, there's a lot of other land out there that could use, that isn't served by PG&E, that could use this kind of funding. So that was one of the considerations to spin it off, and they're trying to raise money outside of the PG&E bankruptcy court money to put forward toward endowment so that they can do that kind of grant giving too.
Okay, thank you very much.
Very important program, and you talked about future leaders, folks that are going to form opinions in their own communities. And when I've talked to youth leaders who have told me that when they take some of these kids from the inner city into the mountains, when they first see cows, they think they're deer. And we might snicker a bit at that, but it really points to the lack of connection that they have with the environment around them. And certainly the kind of work you're doing is, I think, very important to be able to further this. Any further comments? Yes.
Well, I'm just, you know, I remember when you made the presentation last time, I think we were in Stockton. But I just am ever so impressed every time I hear from you about the kinds of expertise and the kind of leadership that's on this board. And, you know, I can't imagine what kind of time commitment it is, but I'm only one board member, but I think that based on what everybody said, you have our sincere appreciation and admiration for the work that you put in. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
I have to echo Carmen's comments. Any further comments? Thank you very much for a very, very informative presentation. We'll move on to the agenda, item 22. This is the time and place for a hearing to consider adoption of a time schedule order for Collins Pine Company, Chester Sawmill. Is there anyone present who is contesting the proposed action and wishes to present evidence or testimony on this matter? Very good. Since there are persons wishing to present evidence on this item, we will proceed with the hearing. This hearing will be conducted in accordance with the notice of public hearing and meeting procedures published with the meeting agenda. At this time, evidence should be introduced on whether the proposed action should be taken. All persons expecting to testify, please stand at this time, raise your right hand, and take the following oath. Do you swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth? If so, answer, I do. Thank you. The designated party is Collins Pine Company. The total times allowed for testimony is as follows. Collins Pines Company, 10 minutes. Community Health Watch and Global Community Monitor, 10 minutes. All other persons are interested persons and shall limit their testimony to 3 minutes. A timer will be used. Please state your name, address, affiliation, and whether you've taken the oath before testifying. Does council have any legal issues to discuss at this time?
Not at this time.
Thank you. We'll now begin with the staff presentation.
Good morning, Chair Longley, members of the board. My name is Brian Smith. I'm a supervising engineer in your Reading office, and I have taken the oath. This agenda item, number 22, is a proposed time schedule order, or TSO, for the Collins Pine Company Chester Sawmill facility in Plumas County. The facility is located in the town of Chester in Plumas County on the northwestern shore of Lake Almanor. It's approximately 150 miles north of Sacramento. The elevation is about 4,500 feet. This is an aerial photo of the facility and the surrounding area. The sawmill and its electricity cogeneration facility is shown outlined by the yellow rectangle. The town of Chester, population just over 2,000, is to the east. Lake Almanor, a large PG&E hydroelectric impoundment on the North Fork of the Feather River, is shown on the far right of the photo. The North Fork of the Feather River flows into the lake from the west, as shown by the yellow dashed line. Another stream, called the Stover Ditch, is shown by the blue dashed line. It splits off from the Feather River, flows by the Collins Pine facility, then through the town of Chester, and follows a braided path out to Lake Almanor. Approximately 0.36 million gallons per day, or 360,000 gallons per day, of wastewater from the Collins Pine facility is discharged into the Stover Ditch. The wastewater is mainly comprised of waste from the wood-fired electricity cogeneration plant at the sawmill. It includes boiler blowdown, cooling tower blowdown, discharge from the air pollution control equipment, and the treatment consists of a series of clarifiers and settling basins. In February 2009, a renewed NPDES permit was issued to the discharger with new effluent limits for copper and lead and a continuation of existing effluent limits on chemical oxygen demand, or COD, pH, and a few other constituents. This was the first time the discharger had limits for copper and lead. The copper and lead limits were established in accordance with the California Toxics Rule and the state's implementation plan, or SIP. At the time of the 2009 NPDES permit, at the time it was drafted, it appeared that the discharger may not be able to immediately comply with the copper and lead effluent limits. So in accordance with the SIP and the State Board's NPDES compliance schedule policy, the NPDES permit included a compliance schedule for copper and lead and included interim effluent limits that the discharger could comply with while the discharger took actions to come into compliance with the new limits. The compliance schedule and interim limits were in effect until May 18th, 2010, about a year and a quarter. The maximum time allowed by the SIP for an in-permit compliance schedule. At that time, the in-permit compliance schedule expired and the final limits for copper and lead became effective. Since then, the discharger has had periodic effluent limit violations for copper and lead, as well as for other parameters including COD and pH. Although the discharger has made some modifications to the treatment process in an effort to comply with the effluent limits, they continue to have effluent violations for COD, pH, copper, and lead. The COD and pH limits are pre-existing limits that have been in place for several permit cycles, so the discharger is expected to be in compliance by now. However, the copper and lead effluent limits were new in 2009. Regional Board staff and the discharger have discussed the possibility of a time schedule order, the TSO, to allow the discharger more time to come into compliance with the copper and lead limits and avoid continuing mandatory minimum penalties, or MMPs, for copper and lead while the discharger continues to work toward compliance. In June 2014, the discharger provided sufficient information to support issuance of a TSO for copper and lead. This information included a description of what the discharger has done so far in attempting to achieve compliance and what they still need to do and how long it will take. Once that information was provided, Board staff prioritized preparation of a draft TSO, discussed it with the discharger, circulated it for public comment, and calendared it for the first available board meeting, which was the December 2014 meeting. Comments were received from the discharger and 2 environmental groups. In order to allow all parties time to review the comments, staff's response to comments, and revisions to the TSO, the item was postponed and rescheduled for today's board meeting for discussion. The proposed TSO would provide Collins Pine with approximately 2 additional years to come into compliance with the copper and lead effluent limits contained in their existing NPDES permit. The proposed TSO includes interim effluent limits for copper and lead that the discharger can comply with while they make their additional improvements. The TSO would provide protection from MMPs for copper and lead during this time. These types of discharger-requested TSOs are frequently uncontested agenda items, but in this case we received comments on the tentative TSO from the discharger and from 2 environmental groups. The discharger supports the TSO but believes it should retroactively cover some past violations. The environmental groups believe the TSO should not be issued and that Collins Pine should be required to immediately comply with the NPDES permit effluent limits. In these next slides, I'll go through the comments received. The comments are shown in yellow with Regional Board staff's response in white. The discharger submitted comments on the tentative TSO. They requested that the TSO retroactively cover copper and lead violations back to when the discharger first requested a TSO and protect them from MMPs for those violations. The discharger states that they have been actively seeking a TSO since September 2013. Regional Board staff responds that the California Water Code does not allow for retroactive protection from MMPs, and that the time schedule orders are prospective in nature, not retrospective. Furthermore, although discussions between Regional Board staff and the discharger regarding the possibility of a TSO have occurred over some time, it wasn't until June 2014 that the discharger submitted sufficient information to support consideration of a TSO. And I should note that the discharger is no longer contesting the TSO and is here to answer any questions. Comments were received from two environmental groups, Community Health Watch and Global Community Monitor. These comments were submitted by Aqua Terra Aris Law Group, or ATA, on behalf of the groups. ATA submitted about 18 comments, which have been responded to in Regional Board staff's response to comments document included in the agenda package. For this presentation, I've tried to consolidate the comments into overarching topics and have paraphrased the comments. The original comment letter is included in the agenda package. ATA submitted several comments regarding the legal basis for the proposed TSO and believes the TSO is not legally supported. Regional Board staff disagrees. In response, I'll lay out the legal authority being relied upon, and we have OCC legal counsel here to help answer any specific questions. The current NPDES permit, issued in February 2009, included a compliance schedule for copper and lead and included interim effluent limits for copper and lead. The compliance schedule and interim limits were established in accordance with the State Water Board's policy for compliance schedules and NPDES permits and the State Water Board's policy for implementation of toxic standards for inland surface waters and closed bays and estuaries in California, referred to as the SIP or the SIP. The SIP allowed in-permit compliance schedules for pollutants like copper and lead to be granted until May 18, 2010, exactly what the compliance schedule and the NPDES permit allowed. Separate from authority to issue in-permit compliance schedules, the board also has the discretion to issue time schedule orders pursuant to sections 13300 and 13308 of the California Water Code. Another section of the Water Code, section 13385, deals with how MMP's protection is provided for discharges that meet several conditions, including being in compliance with the time schedule order. Specifically, two subsections of 13385 are applicable. Section 13385, subdivision J3A through D, conditionally allows up to an initial 5 years of MMP's protection. A second section, 13385, subdivision J3C22, conditionally allows up to an additional 5 years of MMP protection. Therefore, up to 10 years of MMP's protection may be provided. This potential 10 years of MMP's protection is separate from any in-permit compliance schedules that may have been granted previously. In this case, the in-permit compliance schedule applied from permit issuance in February 2009 until May 18, 2010. Then the discharger was eligible to be considered for up to 5 years of MMP's protection until May 18, 2015, under the Water Code's first 5 years provisions. Then the discharger is eligible to be considered for up to 5 additional years of MMP's protection until May 18, 2020. The proposed TSO would allow up to January 2017. The discharger is committing to achieve full compliance with copper and lead effluent limits by then, less than 2 years from now. Based on comments received from ATA, revisions were made to the proposed TSO to more clearly explain the legal basis for each discrete time period. This was complicated by the fact that in this specific case, different time frames apply to the average monthly effluent limits versus the maximum daily effluent limits. Regardless, the TSO is legally justified, and full compliance with the average monthly and daily maximum effluent limits for copper and lead is required by January 2017. ATA commented that the proposed TSO doesn't require the discharger to ever reach compliance with old, existing, and industry-wide achievable standards for copper and lead. Regional Board staff disagrees. The proposed TSO specifically requires compliance with copper and lead effluent limits to be achieved by January 2017. Also, the copper and lead effluent limits were newly applied in the 2009 NPDES permit and are not considered old or existing standards for purposes of MMP's protection through a time schedule order. ATA commented that the proposed TSO doesn't require the facility to fundamentally change their practices to come into compliance. Regional Board staff agrees. The purpose of the TSO is to require full compliance with the effluent limits by the end of the allowed time period, and to provide protection from MMPs for that duration of time. The TSO is not intended to direct the manner in which the discharger achieves compliance. ATA commented that they believe the proposed time schedule order violates the anti-degradation policy. Regional Board staff does not agree. The state and federal anti-degradation policies apply to the establishment of effluent limits and other conditions during the issuance of the NPDES permit. The state and federal anti-degradation policies do not apply to issuance of a time schedule order. ATA commented that the proposed time schedule order would elevate effluent limits and allow continued violations. Regional Board staff does not agree. The proposed time schedule order would require full compliance with the existing copper and lead effluent limits contained in the 2009 NPDES permit by January 2017, the end of the TSO term. In the meantime, the TSO would include interim effluent limits for copper and lead that the discharger could comply with based on a statistical evaluation of their effluent monitoring data. The TSO would protect the discharger from receiving MMPs for exceedances of the final copper and lead effluent limits contained in the NPDES permit during the term of the TSO, provided the discharger is in compliance with the TSO. The intent is to at least require the discharger to maintain past performance until they complete their facility improvements and achieve full compliance. The next few slides will show graphs of historical copper and lead effluent concentrations and the respective final and proposed interim effluent limits. This graph shows the effluent copper concentrations over time from 2010 to 2014. The horizontal axis is time, and the vertical axis is concentration. The blue diamonds are a scatter plot of the copper concentrations measured in individual samples of the effluent. The horizontal red and yellow lines represent the daily maximum limit and the monthly average limit contained in the 2009 NPDES permit. These are the limits that the discharger has to come into compliance with. As shown, there are a number of samples that exceeded the monthly average limit and some that exceeded the daily limit. In other words, some of the blue diamonds are above the yellow line and some are above the red line. The top green and blue lines represent the interim daily maximum limit and the interim monthly average limit proposed in the TSO. These are the limits the discharger would have to comply with during the term of the TSO until January 2017. These interim limits are based on a statistical evaluation of the effluent data. Based on past data, the discharger should be able to comply with these interim limits. In consideration of comments received from ATA objecting to the magnitude of the interim limits, Regional Board staff believes it is appropriate to tighten the proposed interim daily max limit. That's the top green line. Staff now proposes to set the interim daily max limit equal to the interim monthly average limit. Let's bring the green line down to the blue line. So now the interim daily max and monthly average limits are equal, as shown by the blue line. and the agenda version of the proposed time schedule order reflects this change. The discharger's past performance shows that they can meet these interim limits. That last graph was for copper. Here's a similar graph for lead. The top green and blue lines representing the interim limits, and the red and yellow lines representing the final NPDES permit limits. Similar to copper, the proposed time schedule order has been revised to set the interim daily max limit equal to the interim monthly average limit. So the green line will move down, be equal to the blue line. And again, the discharger should be able to comply with these interim limits. In summary, staff recommends adopting the proposed time schedule order as presented in your agenda package. This concludes my presentation. I'd like to enter this presentation and the case and monitoring file into the record.
Thank you very much. Questions? Yes, Carmen?
Since I appreciate the slides at the end because my question kind of goes to that, which is what about, what are the limits as far as risk to human health and degradation to the environment? Are the limits that are being proposed still protective of those issues?
Well, so the limits set in the NPDES permit are set to implement the appropriate water quality standards so the effluent would be in compliance. In this case, the proposed interim limits in the TSO would be above that level, so theoretically we're potentially exceeding those concentrations in the receiving water, and there could be effects from that.
For fish, correct?
For aquatic life.
Not human health.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Well, as I saw in lead, there was, it looked to me like one excursion, and that same excursion existed for copper. A few more points above, on the order of maybe 5% of the data points approximately, were outside of the standard that's being set. And copper is toxic to fish. So it looks to me like it's entirely feasible for them to meet the standards. I'm wondering about those excursions, really, what's the cause of them, and I don't expect an answer today. It's just a question in my mind as an individual that works in this field, why they had those. And the two excursions for copper are really grouped, two back in the early part of the graph here, and then that one on the blue line. That blue line, that excursion is common with the lead excursion. So
I actually would like to know the answer to that question, and I think we need to know the answer to that question. I find these limits to be fairly high relative to those particular excursions, and I would tend to set all of these limits closer to what the daily max, the red line is, for the interims, so they get some relief, but I mean, paying more attention is going to help prevent these.
Right.
They obviously can do this, and unless there's some particular reason there's an outlier, then why are we doing such a high interim limit? So I don't mind moving the monthly average up to the daily maximum limit to give them time for compliance, but I think that they should be able to meet that with paying a little more attention to their operations.
So you're suggesting here for copper, the red line.
Well, both copper and lead, it seems like
Okay,
the
let's
red line.
let's look at lead then.
Yeah, looking at
lead-
lead, there's
lead-
one
lead-
excursion
one
for
excursion,
some reason we
right,
don't know,
right,
but why are
right.
we moving all of these limits higher for that
Yeah.
one excursion?
Yeah.
Yeah, the intent was to provide MMPs protection for the range of data that they've experienced in the past. The dischargers here, they may be able to provide some insight as to that particular data point. I know it was related in time to some work that they were doing at the facility.
So unfortunately, I'm sorry, Member Costantino, but I wasn't here during this, so I have a lot of questions for staff, and I asked Clint yesterday, but I did ask, because when we come to the board and we do data analysis for setting effluent limits, we do throw out data points that we think aren't appropriate or questionable. So that same level of scrutiny needs to be done when we're setting interim limits, and so I didn't have a chance to ask staff beforehand, but if we had been looking at this data to set effluent limits, would we have kept those points? And I have a feeling we would not have kept the points. And if that's the case, we shouldn't be considering them here. So that's a question I have, and maybe that would influence the numbers we selected ultimately.
Yeah. Again, the intent was to cover the range of data. We didn't have anything explicitly before us to sort of explain that was a data point that wouldn't recur in the future. But again, Pamela's right. This is a subjective evaluation.
I kind of like Bob's approach of setting the monthly average at the daily max.
Yeah, and if we can hear from the discharger, like you said, about what was happening, to trigger maybe those
Right.
outliers, that'll help us too.
So, I need to switch gears just a little bit, so I don't want to cut that, because I know we're gonna revisit it. But Brian, I think you said they still missed their chemical oxygen demand and pH. They were existing limits, and I don't see them in the time schedule order. So, can you talk about that real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the facility has a number of other compliance issues that are being dealt with in separate actions, separate activities. This proposed time schedule order is simply focused on the copper and the lead, those new limits in 2009. The COD, the pH, others, those are being addressed separately.
So, in 2009, when they received the new limits for the new toxic chemicals, were the COD and pH limits the same as they were previously, or did they get lowered?
No,
And the new limits, were they new numbers, lower numbers?
I don't believe so. I think those were pre-existing limits that had been there for several permit cycles. No protection from violations, so to speak, was provided for those constituents.
But we are handling those issues separately. Is that?
Yeah, we have pending enforcement actions and
Okay.
past enforcement actions.
Okay.
Any further comments by members of the board? Thank you. I now call for testimony by Collins Pine Company.
Good morning, Board Chair, Board members. My name is Barbara Brenner, Legal Counsel for Collins Pines Company. And as indicated by staff just a few minutes ago, we're no longer contesting the time schedule order proposed by board staff. We do hear some few questions by the board members that we would like to address. And we do also agree with board staff's response to ATA comments. And I just want to respond to why the anomalies and what the discharger's been trying to do. And this has been a challenge for this discharger for some time, and we've been working on various methods of treating the water before it enters into one what we call a swimming pool, not the best description, and then goes into a man-made ditch, and then from that ditch makes its way into the Stover ditch. And you saw the graph, the aerial that shows you where Stover ditch goes. And we've been playing with the chemicals and doing little things, and that could be part of the anomalies that you see. And that's why we wanted the time schedule order, so that we can fine-tune those operations and ensure continued compliance. I just want to point out one other thing. The point of compliance has changed a couple times. And where it changes is along the man-made ditch that then discharges to the Stover ditch. So we began testing at the old compliance point. So what occurred in 2009 is the point of compliance was moved towards the facility. And it's not moved by much. It's a very short distance where the change in point of compliance. So we went back and started testing at the old point of compliance, which is just literally a few feet down that man-made ditch. And we're finding that we are well within compliance with our NPDES at that point. And one of our requests in our new permit is to have that old point of compliance be our now another new point of compliance. And to address specifically some of the comments is based on those test results that are quite new, just within this last few weeks, because we are well within compliance, there is actually no threat to fish based on those data points and that information. So although we're asking for relief, what we're finding is the point of compliance is quite determinative, and we feel is very relevant to the issue of whether there's a threat to any aquatic life that may be in the Stover ditch and then to the lake.
Well, you create even more confusion. I think, Ms. Brenner, because moving the sampling point by a few feet then brings up the question: is why would that make a difference? And you know, if is it a sampling anomaly, an analytical anomaly at that point in time? Because, you know, if the lead and in this case, if the lead and copper are in the water, they're in the water at that concentration. And I don't see what moving the sampling point, the compliance point a few feet would have to do with that. Something's taken place between there, you know, but the question is, you know, you're showing data now that's shows excursions that still haven't been explained.
And we're trying to determine exactly that, and that's why we are asking for relief from the MMPs through the time schedule order.
Okay, any further questions?
I just wanted to hear a direct response to the lowering of the numbers, as was described. Would that change your position on contesting the order?
Well, we need the relief, and we need it as soon as possible. We are working on plans, and we have folks going out to the facility as soon as next week to do further analysis of what's happening at the facility. So we would like to keep what is proposed by staff, and we think that is where the interim limits should be set. And we don't feel that there's a threat to the aquatic life that is in the Stover ditch as a result of those interim limits.
Can I ask Brian a question? So if we lower the limits and they have, because as Bob and Carl pointed out, looks like most numbers are below the number we just discussed. What happens if they have a blip? Does that throw the whole thing out, or is it just 1 day a penalty? What's the ramifications of that?
Yeah, so a single, I think we're fighting here. There we go. One exceedance could result in one assessment of mandatory minimum penalty, depending on how high above the limit it is. It could also result in a second violation if that's the only sample for that month. But yeah, it wouldn't necessarily be all samples that they collect are going to generate MMPs. It could be just some of those blips that occur.
And when something like that occurs, I mean, depending on how soon after the sample's taken you realize that it's an outlier, it could sometimes signal contaminated equipment or something like that too, right?
Theoretically, yeah. I mean, every sample point has a number of factors going into it, and there could be other considerations for a particular data point. And
they would be allowed or able to request a second sampling point to try to explain the anomaly, or is that not how it works?
We have procedures and some discretion there. I mean, if it is can be demonstrated that it's an invalid data point, for some specific reason, laboratory errors, something like that, we have discretion to essentially dismiss that or remove that data point.
The QA/QC plan plays a major role here, and my experience with laboratories, and I've run QA/QC plans over laboratories, is they do make mistakes. There are sampling errors, so there has to be something, and you can pick those up if the plan calls for it. One other way to address this that I think we need to talk about is the possibility of shortening the time of compliance. If we leave the interim limits in, shortening to something less than January of 2017. Yes, Bob?
I'm looking at this and like lead, and there's one outlier, and we're going to increase by the daily maximum limit 6 times for one outlier. It does not make any sense to me.
Can you go back to those,
and there's
Brian?
Nothing. There's 2.5 times between the interim monthly limit and the interim daily limit
we
with
have 'em
no
here, I'm
data
sorry.
points.
Could I, sorry, can I interject for just 1 second? I want to make sure that you understand what that data point is. First off, it's not statistically an outlier. There's a reason for that. So I just want to make sure that the board understands why that point is a little bit higher. And I'll ask Stacy to.
Don't forget to identify yourself.
Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer at Central Valley Water Board. My apologies. So Stacy, if you could just explain to the board what that point represents.
I'm Stacy Gotham. I'm a staff engineer in the Reading office. That particular data point, that's in March 2013, I see, or 14. I know that what I'm aware of is that data point was collected right prior to their quarterly dredging, and the dischargers here, so they'll be able to explain what their maintenance is or how they operate their facility. But in the past couple of years, they've increased their dredging to their settling basin to a quarterly frequency. And I believe it's as a result of them seeing this trend, and you can see it in some of the points getting closer to the red line, that as they see a trend going up, that's when they know they need to dredge the basins. And so, but once again, the dischargers here, and they can better explain, if they feel differently. But in that case, they dredge their ponds in April, and that's a March data point. So it was right prior to their dredging of their basins, settling basins.
I'm going to, I think some relief to get to these final limits, and staff's comment that Collins Pine's been making some improvements is important to me. But this is, I'm gonna subject to the rest of the discussion. I feel like that the daily maximum limit should be the limit that gives pretty much all the relief that they need based on these data, except for that one data point. And I just don't want to give and when I say free rein, I don't mean that is not derogatory to Collins Pines. I feel like they will continue to do everything they can to do as good a job as possible. But I think it's our job as the regulatory agency here protecting water quality to tighten this up.
But Bob, question, if we have the daily maximum, are you looking at the red line?
Well, look, if you pick the red line for the daily maximum and the monthly average, that gives relief for well, I'm not looking at the early points because I just assume things have improved since then, but I'm looking at this one point, which is March, and figuring that, okay, next time you dredge, you need to figure this out, and I'm not going to allow
So I'm sorry, just to be clear, you're having the daily maximum become the monthly average?
Both.
Okay.
For this interim
For the
period.
interim, okay.
So it gives a lot of relief except for this one data point in this one operation, and it just, you got almost a year to figure out how to solve that problem then.
Looking here at copper, I'd be willing to go to something in between like 20 micrograms per liter, but shorten it down to the end of this year, get 10 months or so to get there. I don't think it's going to take 2 years to get there. And to shorten it down considerably and give them a little bit of relief, because they're going to have to apparently look at their operations method. If this dredging now seems to be the culprit, what can be done? I hear we'll get some testimony, I guess.
And I tend to like your approach. That's one that I feel I could support as it goes forward.
Pulling the limit down somewhat, but shortening the time. Good. Gentleman behind you would like to.
Respond to that, and I have Jess Brown here with Colin Pine, and has a little bit better technical background than I do.
Yes, I'm Jess Brown. I represent Colin Pine's company. I work out of the corporate office. I'm the corporate environmental manager for the firm, and I've been with the company since 2011. So
Sir, have you taken the oath?
I have, yes.
Thank you.
So in response to the anomalies, if you will, or these outliers, I can't say what happened in 2010. That predates my time with the company. In 2014,
I hate to interrupt you, but could you speak closer to the microphone?
Okay. As far as the outliers, what we're being referred to as outliers, those that exceeded the daily maximum back in 2010, that predates my time with the company. I don't know why those occurred. The one point that is approximately the same concentration of the proposed these interim daily max or interim monthly maximums, I don't know why that happened. I don't believe it's attributable at all to anticipation of a basin cleaning effort. We currently clean our ash settling basins on about a quarterly basis, but with the work that we've been doing as of late, it's very clear that the problem we have with our wastewater treatment process is if you look at total concentrations versus dissolved concentrations, that we have quite a bit of solid constituents, if you will. It's a settling problem. And in the operation between our wet ESP, it's a wet electrostatic precipitator. It's a pollution control device for a boiler. From those flows going into the electrostatic precipitator into what's called a quench filter or pre-quench chamber where water is added, we add treatment chemicals, that we need more residence time. I think if we have more residence time, more settling time, we're going to see more solids removal. We remove more solids farther up in the process, even before they get into our ash settling basins. We think that will be the issue. That will fix things. To address your question, though, in terms of time, the reason being we only shut down the mill once a year. In fact, last April was our last outage, and during that period of time, we made some modifications to our clarifiers. We also made modifications to our ash settling basins to effectively get more retention time in the basins and to route flows where we had any potential for, say, warmer water sheeting across the top of a basin being delivered down at depth. Because if you're going to be dealing with temperature issues in any basin, it either comes on the basis of either depth or shading. So we're making efforts, and we're making that process. Our next mill outage is going to be in May. So the idea of having up till 2017 is so we will be able to do a planning effort, implement some corrective actions, monitor those corrective actions, but we only bring the mill down once a year. If we're looking at a shorter period of time, that means bringing the mill down at a very great expense more than once a year.
Thank you for that explanation. You know, in the past in front of this board, I have not been willing to make rash decisions on one data point based upon my experiences with lab data. And knowing that they're often that they can be in error. The QA/QC plan, as I stated earlier, is so important. Who does your analysis?
The analytical work that we have completed is done by Basic Labs out of Reading. They've been working on
Right,
this for years.
and you know, you need to make sure that they're splitting samples so you can go back. Assume this is AA analysis for these metals. And there can be issues on stuff hangs up in the tubing and so forth. And you need to be able to have split samples so that you can go back and do that. You know, I'd advise them to give them spikes at times, but that means more effort and trouble on your part. But you need to have good control over the laboratory to make sure they're doing good work for you. I really doubt that number is correct. I've seen so often when it isn't. You know, I'd like to come up with something here along the lines of what Bob said, except not down to the red line, and I would like to shorten the time period.
In terms of where these interim limits were even established was as per policy that's already written that the state of California has developed. We didn't come out of these out of the blue. We followed policy, looked at statistical analysis of all of the data that we've acquired, and that's where these were derived. Now, the idea of dropping the monthly average down to an interim daily, making those consistent with each other, we have no problem with that whatsoever. Dropping down any further, I think we could still achieve it, but we established our limits based on calculations of our data statistics.
Excuse me for interrupting. Tell me what you just said again. Okay. You talk very quickly.
Sorry.
I want to be able to...
In terms of what we did, sir, is we used policy that's been established by the state of California for establishing interim limits. We didn't come out of the blue and pick these out.
Exactly, but a little bit further.
Well, so we looked at all of our analytical results,
right,
and then based on that, our consultants that we're working with said, okay, this is what our interim limits should be as per this policy. That's why we ended up with such an inordinately high average monthly value, and then this interim daily max. Now, the idea of taking the interim monthly and bring it down to daily, I have no problem with that at all. I'm fine with that. Dropping it down even to our daily max, I think we can achieve it, but I would sure like the cushion. I don't think we're going to go over, but I would like that cushion. And all other analyses that we've done as far as looking at toxicity, as far as any bioassay work, we have passed all of those. And as Ms. Brenner had mentioned, the sampling we're doing in conjunction with our current permits discharge point and where we're sampling where we had a prior discharge point in an earlier order, where we're sampling that point of an earlier order, we're showing we have no issues whatsoever. And that's something that we're discussing with staff as we're moving forward to the issuance of a new permit.
Thank you.
Oh, and then as far as, like
Yeah.
I said, as far as time period, we need that time to be able to, like, we'll be doing work this coming May. We have a design charrette scheduled. We have, like, as Ms. Brenner said, we have consultants coming to our facilities next week in advance of a design charrette that we have scheduled for the last week of February. We have an outage slated in May. We already have contractors lined up. We already have work that we're going to be doing with our clarifiers at that point. And then we'll be looking to implement a second set of work. But we need that time because otherwise, any work we're going to do would require us to bring the whole mill down for a period of time. And that's just ungodly expensive.
So your position is you already have the planning, is John over here. You already have the planning work done or set up so that you can do work this shutdown in May of 2015.
Correct.
And you're asking that if something doesn't work, you have the next shutdown in spring of 2016, because at the end of 2016, that's when you have to be in compliance.
And if need be, and if we get into a pickle where if we have to do something more, then we'll do that. But it would be nice still to be able to have until 2017 as opposed to cutting it to where we only have this one outage, because everything has already been ordered as far as contractors are online, as far as who's going to be coming to the facility, what equipment's needed, et cetera. That's already been taken care of. You can't just do that within a week or 2 weeks' time. It has to be done months in advance.
Yeah, I'd be, I mean, assuming we bring the limits down, I'm okay with the time, because I know what it takes to bring down a facility.
Okay.
If
Any
I could-
further questions by board members?
If I could have a brief comment here, just to, I think David has more familiarity with the intricacies of this particular time schedule order, but I just want to kind of reacquaint the board with what we're actually doing here today. And I think the main point here is what the CDO and TSO is doing is really, it's an exercise in prosecutorial discretion. It's binding only on the regional board. Permit violations of the underlying NPDES permit are still violations. They're still punishable by a citizen lawsuit that could be commenced against Collins Pine. All we're saying here today is whatever this limit that we set here, and it's not constrained so much by policy, more by what the board has done in the past, is simply say, during the time period which a TSO is around, we are not going to focus on these violations. And so that's why it is open to discussion where we set that blue line, where we set that red line for the purposes of the time schedule order. We're not going to take action on those types of violations in an MMP context. We're going to let the discharger upgrade their facility. We can certainly have the discretion to pull this TSO and expose them to MMPs at some point later on down the line if we see ongoing non-compliance, if we see reticence to implement the controls that they want to do. But really what we're doing here today, it's an exercise in prosecutorial discretion, like I said initially, saying this is how we're going to address these violations. There's still going to be violations. They're just not going to be subject to MMPs.
Thank you, Bob. No, thank you, Patrick. Bob.
I think, I have a technical question, is when you're setting these limits, do they have to be a straight line, or can we allow a short window of time for a higher limit, like when they're dredging during this time frame? Because I'm not comfortable whatsoever in my regulatory law allowing anything above this red line. But I would be comfortable with having an interim higher limit while they're doing work to try and improve the system.
I think I can take a shot at that question. I don't think the establishment of a time schedule order would curtail the board's discretion if in fact they were inclined to set a certain interim daily max for purposes of MMP protection for a certain period of time, and then setting a different interim daily max for, say, the remaining period of time, if the board was so inclined to do so. In my experience, we've never I've never been involved in the issuance of a time schedule order where that occurred. It may result in some complications in terms of how we would enforce those limits. But I'm not reading anything in the statute to suggest that you guys don't have the discretion to tailor the time schedule in that way if that's what you choose to do.
David, is it within our discretion to allow a certain percentage, something in the order of 1% or 5% above the daily max?
Well, I guess assuming the 1% or the 5% is translated into an actual limit that makes it ready and easy to enforce so that there's no question. Sometimes when you're switching back and forth between percentages and numbers, there are questions about whether in fact you have a violation or not. I'd probably be more inclined to suggest focusing on a specific limit in terms of a number as opposed to a percentage, but.
Okay.
So can I suggest, Bob, I think everybody kind of agreeing with Bob that that blue line is too high. So if we pull that blue line down to the red line or even maybe 16, somewhere in that range, and we agreed that the time needs to be what it is, and the discharger said they think they can meet it, and if they didn't meet it, Brian said we could, and Patrick said we're all eligible, then I think that might be a solution.
We're looking at copper.
Right.
If you pull that down, I'd feel a little more comfortable if we unless we give a certain window in there when they're carrying out certain operations. If we could pull it down to 20, that's what I would be comfortable with, and something similar on the lead. Lead maybe in the order of 8.
I have lead up there on the screen for anyone who's not checking it out right now.
And Brian, what would you think about those numbers that I suggested?
I'd be perfectly comfortable with that.
Okay.
Why don't we go ahead with the other
we need the other
speakers
testimony,
and then
yes.
come back to these folks.
Right.
They have a little time to think about it too, then, and make sure.
They have time to think
we
about
come
it,
to
and one of the good things is the other parties have listened to this testimony. So, thank you for your testimony. We'll be talking to you some more, and I call upon the Matthew McClare, who's representing both the Community Health Watch and the Global Community Monitor. Do I have that designation correct?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair. Good morning, board members, and Mr. Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Make sure to speak very close to the speaker.
We use a comment around here. You have to be a rock star. That's
okay, and I have taken the oath.
Good, thank you.
I appreciate the previous conversation with regard to some of the issues that we're looking at in our comments. It will help me curtail some of my comments that I had planned to make, but as a result of the discussion, I believe that there are some additional comments I will need to make, and I plan to do that within the limited time frame. I also wanted to thank the staff for their presentation and effort in regard to this, and the time that they've put in preparing a quality presentation. Global Community Monitor is an international monitoring organization. It's a grassroots organization that helps communities around the world protect the environment and the health of communities. Community Health Watch is a Chester, California-based local watchdog, and they are invested in this because they are members of the community where Collins Pine Company or CPC operate. Generally, the comments that I had prepared can be broken down into procedural, substantive, and legal arguments, and I'll add in a fourth category of responding to previous comments. With regard to the procedural issues, and I'll use acronyms for my clients of GCM and CHW, they first commented in November on the 21st of 2014. Then an amended underlined strike-through was issued on January 6th of 2015, but my clients were never given an opportunity to comment on the revised underlined strike-through. And as you heard today, that staff pointed out that they provided additional reasoning, they provided rationale that wasn't previously provided, and my clients would like an opportunity to comment on that. There was new language, concepts, clarifications in addition to the new limits, all of which we believe deserve comment. And then also further to that point is the response to comments that they provided additional information that we believe, is worthy of comment. And so that's really on the procedural front. On the substantive front, what my clients are missing is really any publication or public review of the information on which the Water Board relied in making this justification. As pointed out in the response to comments and here today, they're pointing to June 2014 final completion of the justifications provided by CPC to the Water Board, but that information and the reliance on what aspects that the Water Board relied on as a result of that justification have never been published, and that's something my clients believe the public is entitled to and would like to have an opportunity to comment on. Pardon me. The discussion that you all have just had with regard to the magnitudes above the MPDES limits for the time schedule order, those are very informative. We obviously would advocate for a shorter time period and down to the red line, if not lower, for the purposes of the time schedule order. As you saw from the reporting data, there's at most 3 points above, and in some point it's just 1 point above to where they set the limits. And those could be statistical outliers or anomalies, but the important thing is we want compliance, we want high quality water, and having a TSO limit at that red line would achieve that and also motivate CPC to take the steps necessary to affect compliance. With regard to Board Member Ramirez's comment about public health, and I'd like to generally inform the board that the OWEA Proposition 65 discharge prohibition says the safe harbor limits for lead in this case are 0.5 micrograms per liter and 15 micrograms per liter for the reproductive toxicant levels, as well as the carcinogenic levels. And so you can see what was proposed in the TSO was at least twice, it was around 12.8, I believe. It was over 2 times the reproductive toxicant levels. This is a source of drinking water. There's groundwater, as well as North Fork, Feather River, and Lake Almanor are sources of drinking water in the Chester, California area, and so it is a concern of human and public health there. With regard to the anti-degradation policy, my clients would like to point out that while certain findings were made in the 2009 MPDES permit to justify discharges for copper and lead, those findings were limited to the average monthly effluent limits and not the maximum daily effluent limits. And here you have the TSO, which is allowing for elevated monthly maximum daily effluent limits without having those same requisite findings which were in the 2009 permit. So this TSO is elevating the maximum daily limits, and we believe that runs contrary to the anti-degradation policy. And in fact, because there wasn't any findings regarding the maximum daily effluent limits in the 2009 permit, the fact that the TSO is then trying to establish them is a de facto new permit limit without the findings.
You're referring, I assume, to what would be allowed under the TSO, not what would be in place after the TSO expires. Is that correct?
What I'm referring to is it starts at the genesis of the NIPDES permit, and the TSO, the NIPDES permit allowed for average monthly effluent limits for copper and lead. Here, the TSO is saying you can have monthly and daily effluent limits for copper and lead without the requisite findings. Legally speaking, this is a form and substance issue. We understand that there's a compliance schedule policy that influenced the application of the California Toxics Rule in the NIPD's permit, and that the exercise of the TSO authority is enforcement discretion, and we understand that. But if you
Let
look,
me interrupt you. You keep referring to the nifty permit.
and
I must be missing something. I'm sorry.
NPDES, pardon me.
Okay.
Sorry.
Very good.
Sorry.
I didn't know what that was either. I thought it was only me. I'm like,
Sorry. No, my apologies. And when you look at what the compliance schedule policy requires, it requires diligent efforts to quantify pollutant levels, source control, proposed schedule for source control and waste treatment, data demonstrating current performance, and proof compliance schedule is as short as possible. Those sound awfully familiar, if not identical, to what the basis for the TSO are. Well, in 2009, they were required to do a constituent study for copper and lead from the facility under the compliance schedule order. And to do that, they had to identify and submit to the board to its satisfaction those categories and others I just listed. And so now what we have is another request to do that. And I think it begs the question of, well, what happened with the constituent study? Why wasn't this able to be achieved before? And it leads to the argument that allowing for further time only jeopardizes the water quality as well as the impacts on the community which this facility's in. And it also, we know that the California Toxics Rule established in 2010, under which the compliance schedule order allowed for them to have interim limits until the Toxics Rule is 2000. The interim limits went to 2010 because that was the last day they could go to, and now we have an expansion of that, although under a different name. It's in the substance, it is the same, and we don't believe that's necessary. And we would just like to point out that, I guess I'll use my last remaining minute to respond to the many comments, is probably one of the more important ones is with regard to, the point of sampling and compliance and where that is in relation to the facility, and the proposal to move it further away from where the discharge point is. It reminds me of the classic argument that the solution to pollution is dilution. By moving that point further down, you're diluting what is actually being discharged. And we believe that, if anything, it needs to be moved further up, but we're satisfied with where it is. And I think it's very important that, CPC itself has no problem with dropping the monthly limit to the daily limit, and then it just remains the question of how much time. I think they've had since 2009 to come into compliance with these limits, and we're 6 years in. Do they really need 2 more years?
That's new, this meeting. It's the Tower of London chimes.
Better than the gong.
Yes. Were you able to address the issues you desired to address, Council?
For the most part, yes.
I appreciate it.
I believe that you have a good understanding of where we stand.
I'm going to, obviously, board members are going to be asking questions, I think, but I want to come back later and get a response to staff. This issue that the organizations that you represent did not get to see the strikeout, am I correct?
No, we did get to see the strikeout, but we never got an opportunity to comment on it. It was as if a new TSO was being proposed, and we never had an opportunity to comment on it, even though it contained new comments, justifications, and other language which we believe merits comment.
And the other one was, you said there were findings. You believe that there were findings made that you did not have the basis. You did not see the basis for those findings. Am I correct?
Yes, and where that came is in the response to comments. It was referenced in that the June 24 was the completion date, and I believe it was in response to CPC's comment for retroactive application, that they said it wasn't completed until June of 2014, and we didn't know that was the set of documents on which the decision and justifications were being relied.
I'll be asking staff about that later. Any other questions of Mr. McClare? Thank you. Then I'd like a response. You might as well stay there because I'd like a response from staff on those two issues, that they did not have their opportunity to comment on the strikeouts and that there were findings without basis for those findings being shown.
Sure. Yeah. So the first item, when we received ATA's comments and the discharger's comments before the December board meeting, we prepared our response to comments document, and based on some of those comments, we made revisions to the time schedule order and sent that out to all parties for, it's been at least 30 days now. And David, I think I'm going to defer to you on sort of the, that comment period issue.
We provided an initial 30-day public comment period as required under the law when the initial time schedule order, draft time schedule order was sent out for submittal. We certainly could have exercised our discretion to open up a second public comment period if we'd chosen to do so. I think that, staff exercised their discretion in consultation with me, that we didn't necessarily see any significant benefit or value in having an additional public comment period in light of the fact.
Wouldn't that be based upon whether or not there are new conditions or new findings?
That's exactly right. I think that's an important clarification, Dr. Longley, is that if in fact there had been, significantly new issues raised, for example, in the context of the draft that was sent out, something that was just wholly not contemplated, then certainly I think I would have advised staff and management accordingly to provide for an additional 30-day public comment period. But if we're going to adopt council's logic, every time we make modifications to a proposed time schedule order, we might see 3, 4, 5, 6 rounds of comments before we finally end up adopting a time schedule order.
I think the way Lori Oken used to phrase it, that it was in a logical output of responses to comments that we made those changes. And today was the opportunity to make any comments you want to those changes.
Certainly.
Because it was part of the agenda package.
Certainly. Certainly, go ahead.
While I appreciate the opportunity to respond and to come to present, but it's also in 10 minutes, and as you saw from our comments earlier, they were approximately 8 pages, and with very detailed, heavy legal research, and there were changes made with explanations which we would have liked to respond to, and I understand that this is an opportunity and this is our chance to respond, and we've tried to raise as many as we could, but we feel that knowing that our time would be limited, we had to pick our targets as opposed to have a comprehensive response to the comment or to the modification or amended strike through underline.
Thank you very much. Any questions by board members at this time? Thank you very much. I'll then take, if you have a closing statement, we give you lots of time. Normally you would have used your time up, but I have opportunity to grant you extra time, and I will.
Now you've kind of put me
I'll
on the
let him
spot.
talk now.
I believe that the main thrust of what we're saying is that we believe that the limit should be lower, which it sounds like you're engaging in those discussions, and so I don't need to belabor that. That would have been one of my main points here is the statistical analysis. Where do those samples lie? Are they statistical outliers? Is there an explanation? And why would the limits then be set at the highest level when we've heard here today that the red line is the achievable limit? And so I would say, you know, my clients would be agreeable if we kept it at that red line. Yeah, and you know, I think the bigger point here is, you know, we've heard a lot about expense versus compliance and the time a shutdown would take. Well, we know that there was supposed to be a constituent study done in 2009 that should have identified the source and the degree to which the pollution causing chemicals, processes, or whatever was there. They've had years since then, and now we're being confronted with well, we can't shut down the mill to make these improvements, so can we keep on polluting the environment at a level above what our permit allows, which is tied to the California Toxics Rule, which set an absolute limit in 2010 for copper and lead discharges. And so I think that's really our main point, is that we would like to have the limits lower in a shorter time period as well.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Staff comments?
Can I comment to
Sure, go
to
ahead.
council? I was just going to say that earlier you heard that these kinds of time schedule orders normally don't even come to the board. And I hope that the people you represent and the community of Chester feel satisfied that and glad that, you know, by them asking the questions and being participants in the process, it really does help shape, you know, the final product that comes out. So I guess the larger comment is that we really do care about public participation, and we hope that they see that they do get to shape the work that goes on here, because we do care about the public, and that's our charge here. So thank you for your interest, and thank you for your time.
Well, and thank you for that. And like I said before, I know that this is a rare opportunity. My clients believe it's a very important matter. They live in the community. They're very concerned. But we also know what a tremendous time resource it is from staff, council, and the board itself. And those things are not lost on my clients, and I will be sure to impress upon them the fairness of this hearing and the willingness of the board to listen and for the thoughtful efforts of council and staff. So again, thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you very much, and I have an emergency, so to speak. I've been told that we're about ready to have a spill here behind the board, and I don't want staff giving us violation permits, so we will take a 5-minute break. I was the amazed look on your face. That's why. So please be back here in 5 minutes. That's happened to me before.
Come on. It's like a punk league.
That's happened to me before. A note comes down my way. It goes, I'm in dire need.
That's right, diaper or else. That's right. It's pretty disgusting, but dirty as hell.
I was like, well, we should be ending soon, because I need to, take a break too, but.
Yeah. I might as well go now. We probably won't get a break. shocked. I was like, what the hell was that?
Hey, that's my international experience.
Let's come back into order. There it is. Very good. We're ready for closing statement by staff, and if you, I'm sorry,
Statement by the discharger?
we already did.
No, you did not.
I left him up there, and we went ahead with it.
You went, that was.
That
with
was
the
Matt
pub-
McClear.
That was with the public.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're absolutely right. Closing statement by discharge. You're
Sometimes I
absolutely right.
surprise
I'm
you, don't
sorry.
I, Dr. Longley?
I appreciate to be able to make a closing comment. You know, the discussion's taken place, the notion of dropping the interim limits to where both the average daily and monthly are the same. You know, we're in agreement with it, and I think dropping it all the way down to our current daily max, if that's the case, then so be it. I still think that somewhere in between would be the most logical and technically the thing that makes the most sense. And it's an opportunity for us to have a little bit of protection, because we are going to be modifying processes, and if we're exploring different alternatives and how they're going to work, we need that. You know, albeit I think we can definitely achieve those lower limits, but it's a matter of insurance and protection. And still, from a time perspective, because of how we operate and when we do take down maintenance outages, when we have to let contracts, bring in contractors, et cetera, we only have a certain period of time when we're able to work without bringing our whole facility down at great expense. And not just great expense to the ownership, to the Collins family, but great expense to the community. As Mr. Smith mentioned from staff, you know, Chester's a town of only 2,000 people, short of the U.S. Forest Service and a few local service industries that thrive during the summer months. Collins Pine Company is the only game in town. And if Collins was in existence, Chester would die as a community by and large. And I think that's something you should be taking into consideration in terms of being able to maintain the economic viability of the company. I mean, if push came to shove, I mean, I can't speak for the ownership. I'm not the guy in the corner office. I'm not the CEO. But if push came to shove, where it made no sense, would we shutter the whole facility? I can't say that. But if push came to shove, that could be an option. So with that being the case, I mean, we're asking for some consideration in terms of, you know, reasonableness in terms of limits and also reasonableness in time so we can fix this, you know, because the Collins family has a commitment. You know, they've been in Chester for more than 70 years and would like to be able to continue to operate in Chester for a much longer period of time as well. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir.
I have one other
Yes, Paul.
question. We had this limit in 2014 or March that was the big, I call it an outlier, but and that was, we think, attributed around the dredging period, but I don't see it in 2011 or 2012 or 2013. I mean, I think it just was an odd year or something.
Yeah, I don't think it's attributable to dredging, actually, because when we're dredging, we're not discharging, or even anticipation of. I'll just say it's an anomaly. In that particular data point, I can't tell you what was going on, what happened. Had we had an anomaly earlier, like in 2013, that would have been explainable, because we did have some process upsets take place. We have a fuel dryer that shut down. Actually, a gear drive broke. So we had some challenges meeting discharge limits during that period of time. So had it been during that time frame, that would have been pretty easily explainable. But by this one particular data point off the top of my head, I don't know why.
And you know, I don't think that, you know, Collins Pine has been, I mean, I think they've really worked hard to do a good job here based on all these points, except for that one point. And I'm with you, the points that were, you know, earlier, those 2 points that were before in 2010 are just, you know, that's like sort of, you know, prior to good operation that seems to be in place since then, so.
Well, Pop, as I stated earlier, I think there's a high probability that point's in error. But we don't know that. That's the only data we have, and it's incumbent upon, I think, the discharger to ensure that their laboratory is splitting samples, pulling samples correctly, the whole 9 yards, to ensure that they have the ability to go back and evaluate that. The laboratory has the ability to go back and evaluate and see if they have equipment error, sampling error, whatever. Should be pulling dual samples too. You know, there's all those things that are, I'm sure you realize, that are very important, and they protect you, and you have to ensure that your laboratory is performing correctly. when you do all of that and you get these kind of data, then you know it's probably your problem and not the laboratories. But right at this point, we don't have the data to make that determination. My experience is laboratories screw up from time to time, and it's not their fault. It's just their equipment it has its problems too. Sometimes it's operator error. I've seen an order of magnitude because the analysis just screwed up by a decimal point. But I think that, it's incumbent upon you to ensure you get your laboratory data that's correct and not incorrect. And if it's correct, it may not support your position, but at least it's correct.
I just want to add too that I'm sympathetic to the time frame issues and the difficulties of shutting a major plant down. So that shorter time frame isn't really what I'm concerned about as much as having the interim limits as tight as possible.
Maybe this is the time to discuss shorter limits. We've talked about using the daily max, but let me suggest some other numbers to you. And rather than making everything the daily max, I would propose that on lead as an example, we do a daily max of 8 micrograms per liter, and on the interim monthly max that we go down to 4 micrograms per liter. And those numbers, if I'm correct, that would be a daily max of approximately interim daily max of approximately 20% greater than the permit would otherwise require. And I'm talking about lead, yes. And 33%, about a third greater than the normal permit would allow. And for copper, I would, following the same, if I've got my numbers right, I would propose an interim daily max of 16 and a interim monthly max of 8. Maybe of 8.
You have to slide.
No, it wouldn't. I think I got the number wrong.
Dr. Longley, just
It's supposed to be a third. I'm sorry. It would be. We're going back and forth here. There we go. There's copper. And it's 7.5 now. So about 2, 4, 6, 8, 24, 3. I'm sorry. That number would be 11, not 8.
For the monthly average, Dr. Longley?
The average monthly average of
For
11
copper?
on copper.
You would put them in immediate non-compliance, so those dots between the yellow and the red right now.
I'm sorry. I said monthly, and I did my calcs wrong. I'm sorry. So we're at 12, 14, 15, 20. That should be 20 for monthly. I was making the monthly less than the daily.
So you're suggesting the blue line, which is now interim daily and monthly max, down to 20?
Down to 20, yes. And an interim daily max of, on copper, I'm looking at copper here. Of 20 for the
For both daily and monthly?
For both, because we've merged daily and monthly at this point.
well, if you want to merge, okay, say 20. I'll accept that. Although I think that on the monthly average, they could come down considerably. They could come down to the 15. So if we came down to the 15 and made that the monthly, but went up to 20, that would allow them a small excursion.
So Mr. Longley, your proposing 20 micrograms per liter for the interim daily maximum
That's correct.
and 15 micrograms per liter for the interim monthly average.
That's what you have now as the daily max, yeah.
But keep in mind the daily max wouldn't be an interim limit as shown on that graph. It does not currently represent an interim limit.
I understand that.
Okay.
I understand that.
So Clint, he's proposing where the red line is, that would become the current daily max proposed final, and the interim, they moved the graph, in the interim monthly in the time schedule order. And then 20 would be the interim daily for the TSO.
Then for lead, what were you thinking?
Let's go to lead. Let's follow the same rationale. Let's use the daily max as the monthly, for the interim monthly average. And 8 as the interim daily max, right. So that incorporates what Bob recommended insofar as the interim monthly, but it's given them a little bit of a leeway on the daily.
Are you still suggesting the same time schedule then, till 2017?
Well, from what I'm hearing from other board members, I'll go along with the proposed January 2017.
Just for purposes of clarity, we'll need to take these out to the decimal point. So if you could reiterate those numbers with a 0.0 or
0.0 on all numbers.
I certainly appreciate that.
Thank you.
So I hate to be technical, but I'm going to be. If you look in the proposed time schedule order on page 7, or yeah, the proposed daily maximums are 14.92 and 5.92. Are those which you now want also as the interim monthly limits for each of those constituents to be pulled out that way, or do you want us to round it to 15?
No, you use the existing
Final
daily max as the interim monthly average max.
And then for the dailies, we'll just round them out to 20 and 8.
Yes, please.
Chairman Longley, can I offer one suggestion, please?
Well, just 1 second, and then I'll come back to you. Any comments on that by board members? Okay. Yes, sir.
If at all possible, I mean, not to confuse the issue, but instead of maintaining, say, out to 2 significant digits from a reporting perspective, it would be vastly better if it was just to 1 significant digit. Reason being is that the permit limits they've been established, is the only thing I can conclude is someone had done risk-based calculations. They had them finished at some point of significant digits and never checked back with the laboratory and said, can labs even achieve these? Laboratories don't report their results to 2 significant digits. It'd be vastly better to round to tenths at 6.0, 15.0. That makes much more sense from a laboratory reporting perspective.
I don't have a problem with that. So that makes that does what to the interim daily max?
It could round everything to 14.9 and 5.9.
Yeah, in fact, it lowers it just by a minor amount, which the laboratory can't even do.
Well, we could do 15 and 6, but or we could do 14 and 5.
Now keep the numbers that you just stated.
15 and 6?
Yeah.
Okay.
0.0. Okay, does staff have a closing statement now?
Yes, sir. This is Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer with Central Valley Water Board. While seemingly this issue appears to be simple, as you might have been able to gather, there's a lot going on with this facility. This isn't an easy situation by any means. My staff have been working diligently with CPC for quite some time. They historically have had a somewhat resistant to improving that facility in particular. With the addition of Mr. Brown in 2011, we've been able to sort of make some changes, turn for a course for the better, if you will. We now have commitment from Mr. Brown that they'll continue to work with us in trying to address some of these issues. We're currently engaged in enforcement discussions with Collins Pine. In addition, currently working with them to draft a new permit. So this won't be the first time, unfortunately, that you'll be hearing from Collins Pine, but we certainly hope that once we get through these actions that we have a clean slate which to move forward. I just want to reiterate as well that part of the difficulty and one of the reasons that we're here today is just as Mr. Brown mentioned, trying to balance the important economy of a small town while at the same time, as we discussed yesterday, trying to consider water quality, benefits, and environment. So again, not an easy task. But with that, really the TSO provides some temporary leniency on two constituents, that being lead and copper. We certainly support the board's approach to lowering those limits. We appreciate the full consideration of the time allowed to do so, primarily because it does allow two opportunities. That second one essentially being a contingency in case additional modifications to that facility need to be made. So with that, we certainly support the recommendation.
Thank you, Clint. And I know your staff has worked hard on this, but I think one message to be taken away from this, at least from one board member, is I don't appreciate sitting up here setting limits, and I feel a lot more comfortable when you come in with something that the board I think is more in agreement with. And you heard the conversation today, and I point that out to all staff that we don't necessarily like to sit up here and try to work through and come up with what's a reasonable that makes that split you're talking about, balancing both sides. So we appreciate your efforts, but I think that's one thing we need to work on in the future. Thank you.
Point taken.
Recommendation by Executive Officer.
I agree with the recommendation of staff.
Thank you very much. I'll close the hearing unless board members have any other questions of any of the parties. Seeing none, I'll go ahead and close the hearing and deliberation and voting. I'll entertain a motion.
Dr. Longley, before the board is inclined to take a motion and rule on it, my suggestion would be to walk through the permit itself and specifically the time schedule order, and specifically point out the provisions that have been changed for purposes of clarification. There's been a lot of talk about, what the interim average monthly effluent limitation is, for example, whether copper or lead or something else. Brian and I did talk about it quickly on a break. I think he has developed some sense of where those changes need to be made. I do too, at least for a few of them. And I think it'd be for the board's benefit and for the benefit of the public and the designated parties that we do so.
Point well taken, and we will not close the hearing then. Brian, you want to walk through the permit for us, please?
Yeah, the time schedule order. I want to make sure we have the final version we're referring to here.
Final track changes.
Right, with track changes. So the first in the findings, the interim limits table would be on page 5. There's a table of interim effluent limitations calculation summary. And we would make edits there on the copper row.
So what's the little number down at the bottom?
Page 5.
5's a big number.
5 and 11, okay.
On our copies, there's two
Good.
numbers.
Oh. Are we on the, are we referring to the same page? Okay. And so we would change that final column, the final two columns, for the row for copper, the interim AMEL, instead of 26, we would be setting it at, for copper.
Here you are.
We had different versions up here. So for copper, it would be 15. And then for the interim MDEL for copper, it would be 20. And then directly below it on the row for lead, the interim AMEL would be 6.0. And the interim MDEL would be 8.0. Does that sound like what you're shooting for? Okay, good. And then we would move to the, let's see here. Basically, yeah, it should be page 8. There's another table at the top of the page. And finding 2, I believe.
Well, it is hereby ordered.
Or ordered?
Ordered,
Yeah,
two.
Yeah, number 2. We okay there? Okay, so on that table, similar changes. The copper row, interim AMEL would be changed to 15, and the interim MDEL would be changed to 20. And then directly below it in the lead row, we would change the interim AMEL to 6.0 and the interim MDEL to 8.0. And then actually having to go back to text on page 5. What is it, 5 and 11 in the agenda? Is that what you have, Clint? Yes. Okay. In that text and finding 19 there at the bottom, we will have to make some adjustments to that language to affect the different calculation determination. I don't have that, and we haven't had the opportunity to wordsmith that yet. We would simply be sort of building on the language that's there to specify that discretion is being used to set those interim limits instead of, where the edit was here, changing things to 26 and 12.8, we would be changing things to the table adjustments that we just made.
Does board feel comfortable with that? Because we could ask them to come back after lunch and give them the exact language, or if you're comfortable to go ahead, we can go ahead.
David's shaking his head like, yes, we should be comfortable, or yes, we should come back.
Well, lawyers always like to play gloom and doom when they provide advice to counsel on the board. I would feel more comfortable if we had some more specificity in the language as to finding 19, and if that requires a recess, we'll take a recess.
Well, we'll continue this to after lunch, thank you. And we'll see you back at 1 o'clock or shortly thereafter. I am told that the control program for the DO in the Stockton Ship Channel, number 25, how long is that going to take us?
It shouldn't be too long. I know that there's some folks here that want to.
How long is too long?
That's a good question. I mean, maybe a half hour, 45 minutes.
Oh, we'll adjourn for lunch.
I want to, can
Not
we,
adjourn,
I
but-
mean, is the board pretty set on these numbers so that if the people that are here on this item want to go home, that they can be confident those numbers won't change, and the language that we're going to develop will reflect those numbers?
Particularly because there's very, very strong weather on the way, and if those folks need to make it back, it might be advisable just to say that this board can take a resolution, make changes consistent with that resolution could be done, as opposed to, it certainly is the safer route to, wordsmith.
Well, I don't
here.
mind coming back for a final adoption after lunch, but I just want to provide assurances to the parties here that this is what, these numbers are going to be the numbers that we are going to use.
Would you like me to make the motion now and we'll come back and read the language? Does that work?
I'll defer to David on this one.
You can provide what assurances that you want, but I would prefer that we do it as part of all one package, please.
Right. We're
Okay.
going to wait and do it as one package, but
I-
my
I-
intention is
well-
to stay with those numbers.
I have not heard any objection up here to the numbers. And what is going to be, the changes that are going to be made are simply talking for the rationale of the numbers, as I understand it.
That's correct.
So, Ms. Brenner, you can advise your client whether your client should stay or your client should go home. And so, there will be no surprises. If some board member comes back after lunch, since if you do depart, we won't make a decision. But
And we don't want you to depart like in the long-term depart. You just mean you can leave.
We've heard about that, what do they call it, that atmospheric river that's coming, so. Thank you very much, and thank you for your representation here today.
Carl, do we need a full hour and 15 minutes? That throws everybody.
We could be back here in an hour.
Okay, great.
If that gives staff enough time to do the new language. David works fast.
It's not my burden to carry on this one, unfortunately.
We can handle that.
Thank you. Good. Back here at 1 hour from now.